Hello, welcome to Glasgow Rangers Nation with me, your host, Owen James, a channel that brings you all your latest Rangers news, guys. We're looking at a possible departure from the club. And I think, look, as we said on the podcast yesterday, and as we talked to, a little bit about over the videos as well, we brought out, look, Rangers can want to sell certain players, and you can term certain players as dead wood and certain players has been sort of surplus to requirements these days. But you can only sell what people are prepared to buy, and some players just don't appeal don't appeal to other clubs, and we're not going to be able to sell them. So look, where there are players that you can perhaps get a decent price for, I think now the club will look at obviously maximising that value. The club have spoken very much about that desire to obviously bring in the trading model and to kind of reinforce that trading model. Patrick Stewart mentioned it during the unveiling of Russell Martin. Kevin Thelwell has spoken about it, and I think the 49ers enterprises have been not been secretive at all about their desire to bring in that trading model. I think there is a strong desire within the club to operate very much like Brighton, like Brentford, like Bournemouth. In the English Premier League, who bring in players for minimal fees or not massive fees, but then sell them on for huge profits. Brighton have been particularly successful in that. With the likes of Alexis McAllister obviously departing the club for a substantial fee. Bournemouth obviously now with Dean Huijsen departing the club, Milos Kerkez looking like he's on his way. Brentford with Brian and Mbeumo, so there's obviously precedents there, and I think Rangers definitely want to kind of follow down the Brentford, Brighton, Bournemouth kind of front. They want to that's the way they want to go, despite the fact they don't begin with a B, of course. But look, at the end of the day, this present board are going to take decisions based on business, on what is best for the club in terms of business, in terms of sustaining the future of the club, and putting the club in a financial position to compete on and off the field. So if a substantial offer comes in for a player that they term as too good to refuse, they're going to take the money, because that's where we are. And, as I said on the podcast yesterday, we'd all love to, of course, go back to the days of Graham Souness, to the days of, David Murray, where we had, countless amounts of money to be able to spend on whoever we wanted. And if we wanted a player, we would sell them when we wanted to sell them, not obviously when they wanted to leave or another club wanted to put a bid in for them. So, the latest is that Cyriel Dessers is looking to depart Rangers this summer. According to reports from a number of sources, a number of very reliable sources, AEK Athens are ready to splash the cash and bring the Nigerian, Belgian, whatever he is, frontman to Greece to play for them. Now, look, this, could all be a situation where it's the agent trying to drum up interest. Of course it could, with any situation like this, with any transfer rumour, there's that element, isn't there? There's always that transfer rumour that goes around. It's always, a pinch of salt needs to be applied to it until you actually see a club confirm an interest. The discussion's been confirmed as taking place. You've got to take everything that is said, by any source with a pinch of salt. And I understand that, but it's nice to talk about. It's interesting to talk about, and this is where we are now. The football season's over. We haven't got actual games to talk about, so we talk about players, possibly moving on from the club. So Dessers looks like he may well be on the move to AEK Athens now. A couple of sites are reporting that Dessers has indicated to Rangers that he wishes to leave, despite comments that he made earlier last month, where he stated that he had 2 years left on his deal and wanted to remain at the club. It now looks like his head has been turned. Now, he even mentioned the interest in him as well at a post-match press conference after playing for Nigeria, which is unusual for a player to do. So, look, I think there's a real genuine interest there. So, AEK Athens apparently are in the process of obviously trying to talk to Rangers. They're submitting bids, hoping that one of those bids becomes successful. Now, Rangers are in a position now where we don't have to be lowballed anymore. We have a fee for a player, and that is the fee that we are going to charge for that player. And if that fee is not met, then we can say to a club now, I'm not interested, do one. I think in the past we were in a position, due to the financial nature of the club, in terms of the debt, in terms of the fact the board were not exactly financially forthcoming with their money, that we had to take whatever was bid, and there was obviously a lot of contract mismanagement. There was a lot of situations where the business decisions taken by the board were pathetic and just not very good at all. We've now got owners who are experienced in all of this, owners that know how to run a sports club or sports franchise or a sports club or a sports team. They know how to make the best decisions. They know how to generate revenue. They know how to generate income. They've shown that through the financial success of the San Francisco 49ers in the National Football League. So, this is an interesting situation. So, according to the reports that are in a number of very reliable sources, Rangers are holding out for £5 million for Cyriel Dessers. Now, the report was that Rangers paid £4.5 million for Dessers, so this would represent a £500,000 profit on a player that will turn 31. Now, look, before anyone rages that he scored 51 goals in 2 seasons, we should be asking for more, like 8, 9 million for him, 10 million for him. You're dealing with a situation where you're not going to get that for a player of his age. If Dessers was perhaps 25, 26, 24, that sort of age, you may then be able to command a much higher fee. But when a player goes past into his 30s, the value will fall off. That's just the way things are. That's the nature of the beast, because most clubs are aware that players, once they reach 30, 31, 32, start to plateau or even start to downturn to some degree. So, at the end of the day, £5 million, £500,000 profit would represent an excellent piece of business for Rangers. Now, some people will obviously think this is a fantastic idea and think it's brilliant to sell Dessers. Others will hate the idea because they want to keep him, because they perceive that he's a good goal scorer for the club. Look, whatever you feel on that, that's your entitlement to your opinion on that matter. But the question I've asked on a number of videos now about a number of players is, if we're truly serious about starting a player trading model, and we are truly serious about cashing in on assets and then using that money to reinvest into the team, to build the team, to make it stronger, then no player should be ring-fenced. No player should be put out there as being untouchable. And so Cyriel Dessers, certainly for me, is not in that category. I think, if you were kind of looking at players that should be untouchable within the Rangers squad, in an ideal world, and I accept that this is not an ideal world, Nico Raskan, who is probably our best player, would be probably the only one that I would say is unsaleable. But unfortunately, he will be sold, it looks like, this summer for around 25 million. So, Dessers for 5 million, I think would be an excellent piece of business. Getting in £5 million for someone who is inconsistent, someone who has a kind of, what's the word? How can I put this? Has the ability to miss key chances at key occasions. Yes, scores goals, but sometimes needs 5 to 10 chances to score that one goal. I think would be an excellent piece of business. And the fact, like I said, that he is going to turn 31, 32. He's not getting any younger. He isn't going to develop. He's not going to get any better. So, if we were to wait 12 months, say, to sell this player, not only would he have less time on his contract, but he also, may have suffered a bit of a downturn in form. So therefore would be worth less money. You've got to sell these players at the peak of their value. And I think, looking at Cyriel Dessers, looking at the way he plays, looking at the way that Russell Martin plays, I don't believe Dessers really suits Martin's style of football either. So, I think getting 5 million for him now would be an excellent piece of business for Rangers. And I think, this news today that AEK Athens are very serious about going for him. Now, obviously, there was reports last summer that the club accepted a bid from Atlanta United in the United States and in the MLS, but Dessers turned down the opportunity to go there. And the club obviously allowed him to do that. So, I think there's a real difference now, I think, with the club. And I think, we are being run by businessmen. That's the end of the day, and that's the best thing for the club. And I think, if this is a genuine interest, if this does genuinely come off, I think taking £5 million for him would represent an excellent piece of business for the club, and therefore obviously give us money that we could then reinvest in the playing squad. And I think you've already seen Rangers starting to plan for the next striker, obviously with the links to Dor Turgeman, links to Mattia Freegan. We obviously already have Hamza at the club. We have Danilo at the club. Perhaps adding a Turgeman or adding a Freegan to Hamza and Danilo would certainly give us a number of options next season that, could certainly take this club forward and perhaps offer us a better return in goals and also a better sort of calibre of play in these forward positions. Guys, I'd love to know your thoughts on this story. Thank you for watching Glasgow Rangers Nation. As always, on the way out, please like, comment, share and subscribe. And remember always, we are the people.